Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about The Last of Us Season 1, Episode 6. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So obviously we're picking up... It's interesting how they did it in the show. Kind of like that little extra bit we got at the end of the last episode. Henry and Sam getting buried. Obviously, that wasn't in the game. That was only in a TV show. It's interesting that they would immediately pick up with Henry, which is interesting because that hard cut is how it happens in the game. It's just because all that little extra section at the end of the last episode is that's something they did for the show. So for them to kind of start back there, I wondered did they go back and re-edit that in just because that was obviously, it was a little bit longer because a little bit longer in between episodes because last episode aired a little earlier. So maybe they want to refresh people's memories. Maybe that's why they did it, or maybe it's just to kind of make that impact. Be like, yeah, that's what they've had to basically sit on that thought for 3 months. Ellie's had to sit on that because for her, it's just kind of like, once again, her final message to Sam on his little Etch-a-Sketch was, "I'm sorry." I thought it was interesting that we did end up where I thought we were, because I was like, right, because if I remember the game, the next section was the dam. Obviously, they did they kind of filled in that little section at the beginning where Joel and Ellie with that older couple, and I love that it's just his wife's response is like, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "Yeah." It's like, "Oh, it's like, yeah, he's got a little girl with him." She's like, he didn't do anything to me. He's like, I have eyes, I could tell. Wait, you made them soup? Yeah. I love her responses like that. But obviously, Joel's just trying to get whatever information he can, and I love that Ellie comes out and it's like, come on, they're 1,000 years old, what are they gonna do? It's her running her mouth, and I love it's just yeah, have you seen any fireflies? And the wife's like, oh, we get fireflies only in the summer. Not the bug firefly, the people firefly. It's like, oh, there are people firefly? I'm like, I started cracking up myself. I'm like, you guys are kind of dicks. But yeah, they pointed them in the right direction. Like, hey, you don't want to go this way. Don't go west. It's like, okay, so where else are we supposed to go? Oh, if you want to go west, go east, because you do not want to go, you don't want to cross the river of death. So I also loved her in that section. She's doing the thing where she's trying to whistle. I'm like, yeah, straight out of the game. Her failing and be like, how the hell do you do that? I don't know how to whistle like that. I could just do it with my mouth, but I can't do the whole putting your fingers in your mouth to whistle. I can't do that. So I forgot because I know that pays off later in the story because she does, spoilers, learn how to whistle, but I don't remember when that happened. I don't remember if it was later in this section or is it much, much later when she finally does it. Either way, I just thought that was kind of pretty neat. But them kind of stopping and kind of talking about the future, about what they want. Joel wanting to kind of be a kind of a sheep farmer or whatever. And for her, it's just when you've grown up in the circumstances she's grown up in, it's just kind of right, you got walls in front of you and you got the water behind you. So she's kind of the only other direction you can go is up, He's and he kind of there's a reference to oh yeah, raising sheep on the moon or something like that. But Ellie kind of gets very vulnerable in that moment and kind of opens up about right, do you think the cure will work? And for him, it's yeah, it's kind of, after everything we've been through, it's kind of weird time to decide to start wondering about that now. And she opens up to, it's kind of, I guess she felt now that we're potentially getting closer to the Fireflies, I should tell you, I try to cure Sam. And and Joel's I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than that, But for her, it's what's going to happen when I do save the world? And we're starting to get those conversations where she's kind of so what are you going to do? Because at first she was like, what are we going to do? And he was like, we. She's like, fine, what are you going to do? Because it's yeah, you could tell later on that started crossing her mind where it's when they eventually make it to town and stuff, it's oh, we might be going our separate ways. You could tell that was crossing her mind and bothering her, being oh, this trip of ours is almost over. She's kind of, a lot of those conversations we get later on, you could already see kind of bubbling beneath the surface, underneath her eyes and stuff, So when they ended up meeting all those people, and it's like, oh yeah, these dogs, they can smell the infected, and Joel was scared. Because we had, like, it happened throughout the episode, I was like, is Joel having a heart attack, or is he having a panic attack? The way he talks about it later on makes me go like, oh, it sounds like it's more like a panic attack, like he's freaked out, he's worried. I mean, it could legitimately just be a heart attack, like he probably isn't, like, just the stress of, like, 20 years in this world, like, will, like, you know, age you rapidly and just, like, put, like, a big strain on your heart and stuff like that. So I don't know. It could be a combination of the two. I was leaning more towards thinking it was a heart attack. I was like, at first I was like, wait, is that how they're going to handle that section? I was like, well, there's not much Ellie can do about a heart attack. But it's like, no, like I said, they might have just been straight up panic attacks. I did not realize who that was, like, the main person there, and we find out later on it's Maria, Tommy's wife. But I didn't realize that was Rutina Wesley. Like, the thing I best know her for is, like, obviously on, like, HBO is Tara from True Blood. I want to say that's the first thing I ever saw her in was True Blood. But obviously I've subsequently seen her, like, pop up in, like, a lot of things, obviously. So it was like, oh, that's pretty dope that she's Maria. I was like, oh, that's pretty dope. But it's like, either way, back to that moment where it's like the dogs were there. I was like, oh god, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? But the dog didn't smell the infected on her. I was like, I guess because it's so inert in her that of course you wouldn't smell it. But Joel was like scared and worried. But it's like, oh, it all worked out in the end, so it's fine. But make it to town, reunite it with Tommy and Joel. Because if I remember, because I think it's such an interesting dynamic they create specifically for the show. Because Tommy and Joel are in a much better place in the show than they were in the game. Because, like, Joel and Tommy have kept in contact. They've been pretty close throughout all of this, but not as much in the game. Like, because I don't think they maybe in this section they talked about it more, but I actually don't remember the last time Tommy and Joel were, like, talk to each other in the game. Like, had it been, like, years or something like that. So it's a very different dynamic. Because it wasn't as, to be fair, it's like, I don't remember this section as well. Because I'm like, I don't remember, like, they embraced, but I don't think it was like that. I mean, Joel's kind of not like that as much in the game. But it's like, I don't remember. Maybe they did have, like, a hugging embrace. But it's like, yo, we're reunited, bro. I'm so happy to see you. I wonder, too, like, what's probably going through Joel's mind is like, well, especially after Sam and Henry, it's going to make you want to appreciate your brother that much more, you know? Especially because it's like, yeah, he understood, like, a brother doing whatever it takes to protect his little brother. I don't think I even really let that didn't even cross my mind last episode. It should have been, it's super obvious, I'm sure other people did, but it never really crossed my mind to think about, like, right, Joel was probably thinking about him and Tommy when he looked, I mean, obviously it's a reflection of him and Ellie, but it's also more depicting, like, he was more Henry and obviously Sam was more Tommy, so and I love the whole thing of, like, Ellie not liking the fact that they took her gun, and it's like, oh, both, and I love how they I mean, understandable, like, it's been a while since they've had, like, a full meal, but I love that, like, both of them are, like, they're, like, scarfing down the food the same way, kind of, like, I mean, I think Ellie would have naturally done that regardless, but I think it's just, like, being around Joel probably, like, kick that up even more so like them mirroring each other in that regard. But it's like, oh yeah, the rumors we heard about you, it's like, oh yeah, you got some, like, 90-year-olds basically shitting themselves thinking this place is pure evil, and it's like, stop, like, cussing so much, mind your manners. But also it's like, yeah, like, bad things or whatever doesn't necessarily make us bad people. And then, like, Maria had, like, kind of a comment being like, well, for some of us, I kind of stared at Joel. I was like, yo, I was like, throwing a lot of shade his way, aren't you? Which is interesting because you had that whole conversation with Henry last episode about, you know, kind of like, oh, just because I'm a bad guy because I did bad guy things, you know? I did a bad guy thing, so that makes me a bad guy. So in this case, it's just almost like a continuation of that, and because it turns out because Maria knows what Joel did. Because for her, it's like, yeah, Tommy was there, but Tommy was only there because he was following Joel's lead. So kind of puts a lot of onus on Joel for like whatever they've done. But it's like, yeah, we did what we had to survive. Was it always pretty? No, in fact, it was actually pretty ugly on occasion. Like, you know, what we had to do just to survive. And obviously getting a look at the town and seeing kind of what Jackson's all about. It's like, I'm trying to remember. I was like, did they ever... maybe they did. I don't remember the town being that flushed out in the game. I mean, obviously, that town has significance later in the story, but I'm like, you know, in certain regards, but I'm like, I don't remember the first time through, like, them really flushing that out. It feels like that's a later thing. Jumping ahead a little bit. Feels like I remember that being more of a part 2 thing. But maybe they flushed it out. Maybe they, like, I don't remember. I don't even remember you getting a tour and stuff like that. I remember the dam section, but obviously that it's not the game; it's a TV show, so they're not making that the whole gameplay section. Because I was like, they're not going to do that. Because why would they? Because that's a gameplay section, like Raiders and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, they get brought up conversation wise, but it doesn't happen in the show because it's like you don't need to do that for a TV show. Video game, you kind of need to interject some action sequences, some video gamey sections every once in a while, you know. Especially when you really, but I do love that this episode obviously leans into the emotional side of things. I mean, this story in general always does, but really in this particular episode, in so many regards, because for Joel, it's like, man, did you not know how worried I was about you? I lost contact with you. He even lied at first, been like, yeah, Tess is fine. And it's like, yo, so I tried to get in contact with you, but it's like, yeah, Maria, like, brought me in, like, after I left the Fireflies, I came here, like, Maria and them didn't have to let me in, but they did, and they took care of me, and here we are, and the fact is, Tommy was able to kind of build a life for himself here, and he didn't want to break their rules of, like, using a radio to contact people, because doing that could lead other people to find this place. This place is pretty solid, and if other people like Raiders found out about it, and other people would come and like try and take that and burn that down, understandably. But for Joel, it's like, I was worried about you. I didn't know what happened to you, and you couldn't, like, but it's like, yeah, I had to adhere to Maria. It's like, it's still kind of sucky on your part, not, you know, but for Joel, it's like, yeah, everything I went through just to get here, it's like, all right, like, you know, we can go to the university, and, you know, the two of us together with Ellie, we could, like, drop her off. And I even love that he lied to him, being like, yeah, she's some Firefly bigwig's daughter. And I'm like, I love that you obviously bringing that lie full circle. But I was like, wait. I was like, did Joel immediately tell Tommy the truth in the game? Because I know he was like, don't tell Maria, which I'm sure Maria does know, because he's probably not going to keep that from her. But I think in the game, Tommy does tell Maria immediately. Fairly immediately, I think. I don't remember. Like I said, this section in particular, I remember some of the story beats, but I don't remember a lot of the conversations. But I want to say he told Maria. It still could have happened in this story too. But anyway, like, telling, like, the lie. Just being like, yeah, she's just some bigwig's daughter. So, but for Tommy, it's like, I can't do that. The fact of the matter is, I got too much on the line. Like, I'm scared to death. Like, I have to be even more careful because I have a kid on the way. And it's like, yeah, like, you know. And it's like, well, he's like, I want to be a good father. And Joel was kind of like, well, we'll see. And for Tommy, he took offense. And he's like, oh, we'll see. What does that mean? He's like, just because your life, basically, you put your life on pause, just because life stopped for you doesn't mean it has to stop for me. Which even Tommy realized later on, like, how much of a dick thing that was to say, considering what he lost. It's like, yeah, because he put his, like, life froze for him the moment he lost Sarah. He's been stuck with that for the past 20 years. And obviously for him, time started moving again with Ellie in his life. You know? And it's so sad, too, when he walks out and he sees that woman in the crowd who has hair similar to Sarah's. Because it's that, 20 years later, that's who she'd be. She probably would have a kid or kids of her own. It's like, he'd be a grandfather. And it's just like, not something, I don't know if he really thought about it too much until that moment. You know, because before they even did the face reveal, like, oh, obviously it's not her. But the whole thing of her kneeling down and, like, having a kid in front of her, I'm sure that made him go, like, yeah, like, the life she would have lived. Like, that life of hers was so cut short. Like, who'd she be right now? What kind of life she would have led if she wasn't, you know? I mean, I'm sure it also makes you think about who you would be, especially because because all the judgments he's getting from Maria, and I love that is a conversation we get between Maria and Ellie, but we'll get to that in a second. But it is that thing of like, right, you feeling like because even Joel was like, oh, here you are judging me. He's like, everything I ever did was for your sake too, Tommy. Because Tommy's like, no, it wasn't just you. We did what we needed to survive. But it doesn't mean we always went about things the best way. That there were other options. It's just we weren't good at them. Like the only way we knew how was to do whatever it took to survive. So we did some pretty horrible things. We killed people. We murdered people. So... And to have Ellie have that kind of similar conversation with Maria, which I love that she gets, what was it, like a Diva Cup? I was like, oh, that's interesting. And it's like, and Maria hooked her up with like an instruction on like how to do it. It's like, right. Like Joel wouldn't know anything about, explaining stuff like that to her. So, and then she sees that Kevin and Sarah, like little memorial. I was like, Kevin. I was like, wait, what? Did Maria have a son before? I didn't remember that from the story. Probably, yeah, but I didn't remember that. And it's also heartbreaking because you look at that date, it's like, oh, they were only 3. I didn't look at the date. I no, because it was like 2003, but I didn't pay attention to the date. I didn't see, because at least Sarah is like, and it was like 9/27, obviously was her death, but I was like, I don't remember the one from Kevin. So whether it was like before all this went down, it's like still sucky to lose a child, especially even that young. And it's like, yeah, because I think it happens off screen. It doesn't happen on screen. Maria tells Ellie about Sarah, and the moment she hears about Sarah, it's almost like it actually makes Joel make a lot of sense. Like, it explains a lot more about who he is. And Maria's trying to kind of be like, yeah, should you really be with Joel? And it's like, Joel, it's like because for her, like, she got very defensive because it's like, yo, don't talk about Joel like that. Yeah, he's killed people, yes, but he doesn't do that anymore. Well, he doesn't kill innocent people, because it's also like, you don't know what we've been through, having like, especially after the last section being the whole situation with Henry and Sam and how that played out. It's like, Joel doesn't kill people unless he absolutely has to, because he tries not to. So to have Ellie kind of defending him in that regard, and because Maria says she used to be like a district attorney. He's like, yeah, I used to put bad people away. And it's like, obviously Maria's like, I could tell you're not telling me everything, but it's good. Because like the people, you put your trust in people, and that they're the ones that will kind of end up betraying you. Which I'm like, that line, I'm like, and then it feels like that line, I was like, oh, that's foreshadowing in so many regards. I mean, obviously with the whole Joel thing in this episode, sure. But I'm also thinking like, oh, that plays a role in something else later on, where she kind of got a little trusting, a little too close to someone. Not really close and trusting, but you kind of were alongside someone you shouldn't have been alongside. We'll talk about it when it comes up, but I was like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know if that's him foreshadowing that. That's probably more so in correlation with like everything between Ellie and Joel in this episode, but that Tommy and Joel conversation where he opened up about everything, and that vulnerability, which is all like, you see it a little bit in the game, but like Joel like shedding a tear like that, I don't think you saw in the game at all. I mean, hey, like him being scared because it's like, yo, what, like, one, hey, she's not infected. This isn't just about Bigwood. Like, this is about her saving the world. The fact of the matter is, like, Marlene knew that's what this is all about. And he even opens up about, like, yeah, Tess's dying wish. She got bit. Her dying wish is for me to do this. So how could I turn her down? So that's where we are. And he kind of talked about the Kansas City thing, because it's like, with the whole Brian situation, it's like, she had to save me. 14 years old, she had to shoot somebody because he's like, 5 years ago, I would have destroyed that kid that got me, but I was slow. I'm older, like my reflexes aren't what they were. The fact of the matter is, I didn't even hear the kid coming, and she had to be the one to do that. 14-year-old, like, she shouldn't have had to do that. And for him, it's like, he's scared that, like, I'm gonna get her killed. Because he's like, I have this dream. It's like, well, what is it? It's like, he's like, I have it all the time. And he's like, I don't remember it, but I wake up feeling like I failed her. I'm sure it's a combination of like, hey, it feels like I'm failing Ellie, you know? And then it's also like, yeah, but it also just reminds me of, you know, especially when he has it haunting him, the fact is that he failed Sarah as well. Him not being able to do anything. It's like, right, with the Henry thing, he felt like he couldn't do anything. It was only the Sam situation was handled because Henry did it. It's like the dog situation. He was scared that he wasn't going to be, he froze. I couldn't do anything. He felt like he couldn't do anything during the Sarah section. In his own mind, he kind of made up for it a little bit. Obviously, with the guy, the federal person, soldier that he ends up killing at the end of episode 1, he beats to death. That guy, you know, that kind of plays into it, but it's like more often than not, he feels like he's freezing when it comes to situations where I should be there for. Once again, I'm losing my edge, I'm losing my step, and it's just like, I can't keep this girl alive at this rate, because I feel like, he just feels like every time he's turning around, he's failing her in some shape or form. So he's asking Tommy, he's like, please do this for me, because you're younger, you're stronger, you can actually do this, but me, I'm going to fail her, and I'm going to get her hurt. And then ultimately, obviously, Ellie overheard everything. And it's like, yeah, you're going to leave me behind? It's like, I'm not Sarah. She's like, the fact of the matter is, yeah, you think I'd be better with Tommy, but, you know, I'd be so scared because she's like, he's like, you don't know what loss is. And she's like, dude, I've lost so many people close to me. People who either have died around me or they've left me behind, which I'm like, hey, which makes me feel like that Left Behind story. Once again, if you don't know, I'm not going to talk about it until it comes up in the show. But I'm like, it feels like that might be something they include in the next episode. Because I feel like that could easily be part of episode 7. Might be the entirety of episode 7. Or the entirety of episode 8. Certain things make me feel like that storyline element might be split between both episodes. But, you know, once again, we'll talk about it when it comes up. Either way. For Joel, it's like, yeah, you're right. You're not my daughter, and I'm not your dad. Because he was just hurt in that moment, just because having Sarah brought up, he was like, don't go there. And her saying that, because it's like, don't kind of look at me as a substitute for your daughter. I'm not her. That's not what this is. You know? I do care about you, and I know you, like, don't you care about me? Or is it a thing of all you see when you look at me is your daughter? And then Joel goes in the other room, and it's just kind of like, that's it. Yeah, when dawn comes, we'll go our separate ways. But when the time comes, Joel's kind of like, no, you know, it's like, at the end of the day, Ellie, you get to choose. It's like, you could let Tommy take it. And she's like, let's go. I was like, I don't think the conversation because I know there's a whole section because she kind of ran off, and Joel chases after her. Him and Tommy chase after her on a. And because I know that happens at like a cabin or something like that in the woods is where, or there's like a secluded house, that conversation happens. And then the next day it's almost like no, I think after they go back to the settlement, that's when it's like, all right, come on, we're going together. I think he left it up to her in the game. I just don't remember. Like, once again, vague notions of some of those conversations. But, I love that. It's like, yeah, can I borrow that gun? It's like, sure, Joel. It's like, yeah, because Maria took mine. He's like, I already said yes, Joel. But it's like, you know, good luck, bro. You know, there's always going to be a place here for you, for both of you, you know, when this is all said and done. So, and I love the whole him teaching her how to shoot, which I think it's like, obviously that was already kind of a thing like earlier on because obviously it was more of a thing in the Kansas City section of the story. Or was that? Yeah, it was specifically in that section. He gave her like a rifle to shoot to kind of cover for him. So for her to be in that situation now, and she can't really, she's like, oh, the rifle sucks. It's like, no, it's off. And he ends up shooting it. She's like, you dick. I even love the little thing was like, asshole, and he got it right there on the H. But him bonding and him teaching her about football and, you know, how the world kind of was beforehand. Like, oh yeah, I was a contractor. So, oh, contractors must have been like seen as super cool. It's like, yeah, we were seen as like, yeah, everybody loved contractors. It's like, oh, I love that. Kind of trying to make himself seem super cool when he wasn't. I thought that was kind of neat. But the entire time, because like by the time we were getting to those bonding moments at nearing the end of the episode, I was like, there's about 10 minutes like, are they going to squeeze in the university section? But I'm like, well, to be fair, like nothing like major plot. I mean, yes, plot wise, a pretty big thing happens. What happened in the episode happened, sure, but like other than that, there was like no main big stuff in the university. University's mainly like a gameplay section. So I was like, yeah, you cut all that out. It's like, it shouldn't take too long. So I was curious. Once again, that's the whole interesting thing about the show too, is the pacing of it. Because you're like, yeah, like you forget how many sections can probably get squeezed in when you're like removing the gameplay elements of it. Because I've never actually seen the flow of the game when you just go from cutscene to cutscene to cutscene. I mean, obviously there's literal, like, people have already, it's on YouTube if you want to. I'm not saying that, but it's there, like, for people who've like, because I know some people like legitimately have no interest in the game just because it's like, right, they're not into stealth games. They're just, the gameplay isn't, that's not something that's appealing to everybody. Everyone's got their particular taste in games and stuff like that. So, but I know, yeah, like people will tell you like, oh, they're just compilations on YouTube of like all the cutscenes of The Last of Us. So you could get the story in case you were just never like, yeah, the gameplay's just not for me. So there's that. So like, I don't know what the flow of that is like without the gameplay section. So I don't know like how the story, like the flow of that is without the gameplay. It's, I mean, obviously it's a little jarring because obviously like there's a lot of cutscenes that lead directly into gameplay sections. So without that, it's going to be I'm sure it's a little jarring. But it's just so interesting. Once again, the pacing of like how much you fit in an episode was like, understandably, once again, like obviously the Jackson stuff is like the biggest stuff, and like the university stuff is only mainly like a gameplay section. So I also love Joel being like, yeah, I would want to be a singer. And she's like, really? Sing me some. He's like, no, you're already laughing at me. She's like, come on, I'm about to save the world. The least you can do is like sing to me later or something. He's like, yeah, you're right. You deserve, I could at least do that for you. So, but I was so curious. I was like, how are they going to do this section? Are they going to do it directly? Is it going to be like straight from the video game? I'm like, okay, they're not. The moment they were on the ground floor, I was like, okay, so it's not going to go down like it did in the game. And obviously, Joel and that guy struggle. I thought was so interesting, like the way Joel like grabbed the guy and like strangled him, because it's like, you haven't really seen Joel do that in the show. I don't think he's done it at all. But yeah, that's like one of the stealth, that's the stealth kill in this game. It's like Joel coming behind you and strangling you, him like snapping the guy's neck like that. I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, obviously showcasing like him in hand-to-hand combat, but also it's just kind of like a little, I think, probably homage to the game in that regard. Maybe not. But then him getting stabbed. Now, in the game, if I remember correctly, that's why I knew like it was different the moment they went, like they were on the ground floor, because they were on like a higher floor in their university, and Joel falls out a window and lands on rebar, if I remember correctly. I'm fairly certain that's how that happens. Yeah, like he falls on a piece of rebar, but they changed it and he just gets stabbed. But luckily they got out of there in time. But Joel ends up passing out and just like at least freaking out because like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go without you. Please, like, just having that conversation with Joel of like everyone around her dies or leaves her behind. Like, please don't be another person. For people who don't know the story, I'm just curious what their thought process is at the end of the episode, because I know they're like, there's no way they're doing that. They're like, oh, it's a fake out, which is, that's funny in so many different regards. I won't say why that's funny and interesting, but it is. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. If you know what I'm kind of winking and nodding to, when I'm kind of referencing, you know what I mean? But it's like, it's going to be interesting to see like how many people thought like, wait, are they? Especially because you know where the, in the story is like, where how the next section plays out. You're like, okay, interesting. So how are people going to be feeling at the beginning of the next episode? I'm so curious too, are they going to do like an exact shot for shot with like how that next section begins in the game or not? Oh, that's going to be so interesting to see how that how this next episode plays out. But that's also the thing I was thinking about too, going back to the pacing. It's going to be interesting because we got 3 episodes left, and I'm like, I can see that. I was like, okay, that whole next section, I could see that being an entire episode to itself. But then I'm like, immediately after that, like the next section after that, it's like the technical final section of the game. Technically, there's 2 final sections. There's like the big part, and then there's like a little thing at the end of exploration, and then like there's the final sequence and stuff. And I'm like, so like there's like 2 major bits left in the story, like after the next section. So like I said, the entire next section could be one. But then that's why I was like, well, I guess if you throw in the Left Behind stuff too. That's where I'm like, dude, I'm so curious to see how much they decide to put in episodes and stuff, like what the pacing of these next episodes are going to be. Like I said, I could see the entire next section being the entire episode 7, but it also depends, like I said, when they decide to sprinkle in the Left Behind stuff and how much they sprinkle in, because I know it's a part of this season and they haven't gotten to it yet. But I'm just curious how they'll go about handling that. So that's going to be really, really interesting how they when they decide to kind of implement that in the story and how they go about implementing that stuff. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see. I'm also curious to see what they add at the end. Also, too, oh God, I'm talking too far ahead because I hadn't really taken time to think about it. The final section of the game, you could go about 2 different ways. I don't think it doesn't matter which way you go, but you can kind of go. I'll just say, I don't even want to say that much. I'll wait till the episode happens and then we'll see what choice they decide to go down with that. But that's not going to be until episode 9, until the season finale. So anyway, it's definitely going to be interesting to see where the next episode takes us with all of this, especially this. Next section is going to be interesting to see what changes they make and how much they keep exactly the same with the next section. Either way, till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.